All right, folks, well, this is a transition period we need to talk about between Plato and David Hume. We're jumping effectively 2,000 years of history here, right? Why are we doing this, right? In an introduction to philosophy course, it's not possible to cover all 2,500 years of the history of philosophy. It's just enormous. What we can do, though, is by doing Plato, Aristotle will come in and make some basic modifications to Plato. There's a very good painting called The School of Athens by Raphael from the Middle Ages, right, where you see a picture of Plato pointing up, carrying a copy of the Timaeus, his book on metaphysics, right, and physics, and Aristotle carrying a copy of his Ethics and holding his hand to the middle, right. Plato's had two realms, right? He had the realm of the forms, which existed in time but not in space, and then he had material objects just in space and time. Aristotle says, no, that's two, there's a division there, it's hard to explain how something that is not material could actually influence something material. So he tries to put the forms inside the matter. The way to conceive of this is the potential to be something is already in the material object itself, right? It's simply the arrangement, form and pressure, right, that then create, right, what it becomes, right, and this is how we understand the world. So he kind of has a more moderate view of Plato's, what might be called a more extreme point of view, the separation of two worlds. He thinks they're connected, but there are two ways to think about that world. One is material, the other one is through these forms as well, right? So he modifies Plato. And then what you'll have after that is you have philosophy stops really being done in a large original amount of form, right? I mean, a large amount of original material, right? You have to be able to think and think freely. If you don't have this capacity in philosophy, you lose the ability to do it. And what you have with the passing of Plato, the end of Aristotle's life, is you have Alexander's taken over, right, everything. He's now controls the world as the Greeks know it, right? And he's made himself a god. And if I'm going to write a book on philosophy, now I've got to explain somehow how a man can become a god, and that was just not possible in Greek secular thought. So philosophy really can't be done anymore without making yourself an enemy of the state. So you'll see in Roman times, and you'll see in things like that, when you have these large, right, empires that have melded politics and religion to some degree, right, philosophers retreat off into Epicurus and his gardens. They leave the major metropolitan areas and find their places to continue their work, right. So you'll have some minor schools of thought that do develop, right, in the post, right, Aristotelian, right, age, right, and in the Roman age, but nothing really is significant. They're just modifications of Plato and Aristotle, right, these kind of things, right. And then you'll have, right, the rise of Christianity, right, inside the Roman Empire, right, among the masses there. And there's a need then when Christianity starts becoming intellectually acceptable to the upper classes, and they start believing, they have to, as it were, square the circle. They've got to make sense out of this in their educated fashion. So they start wanting to, as it were, create a theology. They're looking to combine, right, Greek philosophy with the Christian scriptures, and then write out a theology. And you'll see this first done and accomplished in true form of a great thinker, St. Augustine of North Africa. He combines, right, Plato and the scriptures to create, right, Augustinian thought, which is heavily influential, right, in Protestant, thought in Protestant churches, right. And the same thing will happen after the Dark Ages in the 13th century with St. Thomas Aquinas. He'll take Aristotle and synthesize it with the Christian scriptures, and you get basically the basis of Catholic thought, right? So they actually use two different, right, medieval philosophers. Those are the two big ones. There are some figures that are important in medieval philosophy, but they're fundamentally still working on the same difficulties, same questions, right, that the Greeks were. So this period of time is comprehensible if you comprehend your Plato, because they're modifications of that basic substructure, right? So Plato's dominating the scene, right, until we get to modern philosophy. So what we're taking a look at David Hume is this transition, right? Philosophy has now taken epistemology with Descartes, right? He does this first and puts it center stage. Epistemology has always been a question, how do we know, right, what we claim to know, right? It had always been a question in philosophy, but Plato hadn't worked on it that hard, and he had some modifications to it, but now it's become center stage, become the question. We've got to solve that before we can solve any of these other questions, right? So Hume is operating in this new Enlightenment period, where actually something new, or not new so much as really a lot of changed emphasis, making it the first philosophy, right? Descartes will call his book Meditations on First Philosophy. The first philosophy used to be metaphysics. Now the first philosophy is epistemology. Now David Hume is operating now then in this environment of trying to take questions of epistemology. And what he's going to take as his base starting point is this idea that's called empiricism, or that all of the information we gather, everything we can understand from the world, right, comes from our senses. The British are very heavy into this, right? Also catapults their development of sciences, right? If you don't believe anything you can't see, right, it orientates you towards the physical world very effectively. While it doesn't orientate you at all towards, shall we say, other matters, right? What might call spiritual things like this is going to be ignored in terms of trying to focus on the physical world. And as Bacon will say very famously, right, nature to be commanded must first be understood. Right? So it's kind of that concept. I'm not trying to necessarily understand for understanding's sake, but understanding for command's sake and stuff like this as well. But anyway, so there's real heavy movement into how we know things. And then this empirical element, right, makes it very heavily into itself into British thought, right? And then subsequently to American thought, right, as well, right? So Hume is working that tradition, and he starts out to try to lay out the rules. He starts out initially trying to build a positive philosophy, right? Newton discovered the three laws of motion for the universe. He wanted to put the three positive laws right together for the human mind. What happens, right, is he can't find positive explanations. So the result is, right, that he explains his conclusions. So we have here is a kind of what's called partial philosophy. Plato asked questions, why be moral, and provided a series of answers. So he asks a question and answers them, right? David Hume's going to ask questions he doesn't have an answer to. So he's not a first-tier philosopher, he's a second-tier philosopher. These are very important questions, and he'll shape, right, the thought of things to come and eventually result in Marxism for things like this, or the questions he's asking. But right, he's not important for the answers he supplies. He's as important for the questions, right, that he asks. He's going to ask some really, really good questions about what it is possible to claim to know, right, by looking just at things empirically, right, just from our senses, what we can claim to know from that, right. So it's going to be a devastating critique of reason, and then we're going to have the reconstruction of this eventually, right, and through Kant and whatnot, right on to Charles Sanders Peirce. We'll take a look at their last book. Right, some thoughts on thinking, a way to reconstruct this in light of pragmatism. So we try to answer Hume after we put Hume's question on the table here.